Hey kids, all right. So in our last article that we read, it was really about the end of World War One and kind of how nobody was satisfied with the way the whole thing shook down. Now, over the next few articles here, we're going to take a look at the different countries that were kind of the major players of World War Two, and then there were dozens of countries that were involved in it, but we're going to kind of look at the biggest ones and what was happening to them between the two world wars. So basically the decade of the 1920s and the 1930s. Okay, so we're going to start out with two of the most important ones, and that is the countries of Germany and Italy. Okay, and you probably are familiar a little bit with Adolf Hitler and the rise of the Nazis with World War II, but you probably don't know too much about Italy. And Italy was very important in that whole thing because they provided the model for the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. So let's take a look at this, and if you could follow along while I read. World War II, between the wars, Germany and Italy, the rise of totalitarianism in Europe. After World War I, many nations in Europe attempted to establish democratic governments. Often these governments were corrupt or ineffective in dealing with the troubles of the 1920s and 1930s. One by one, many of these European nations discarded representative government in favor of autocracies, or rule by one person. The styles took many forms. In the Soviet Union, a communist government under the Bolsheviks was installed. In Yugoslavia, a king reigned. In Italy, Spain, and Germany, a concept called fascism took hold. Fascist dictatorships in Italy and Germany led directly to World War II. A modern-day Caesar. Italy had an odd road in World War II. Most of the nations that were part of what would be called the Axis powers in World War II were members of the losing side in World War I, such as Germany. Italy fought on the side of the victorious Allies. When World War I started in 1914, Italy chose to remain neutral. As the war progressed, Italy listened to proposals from both sides to join the war. Finally, Italy joined the Allies in 1915 with the Treaty of London. In the treaty, Italy was promised land that in 1915 belonged to Austria. Italy's contribution to the war effort ended up less than what Britain and France hoped. When the USA joined the war in 1917, Italy was cast aside as an important member of the Allies. When the war ended, Woodrow Wilson's pledges about self-determination in the 14 points overrode the Treaty of London. Italy received none of the land promised. And there's a picture of Benito Mussolini. We're going to get much more familiar with him in the next moment or two. The destruction of the war caused economies like Italy's to struggle in the early 1920s. During this time, an Italian newspaper writer named Benito Mussolini began to embrace the ideals of the fascist political movement. Mussolini joined and quickly took over the fascist party. By 1922, he and the fascists marched on Rome and took power in Italy. By the mid-1920s, Benito Mussolini, known as Il Duce, which is Italian for the leader, was one of the most powerful men in Europe. As the 20s wore on, Mussolini got the Italian economy to rebound. He was proclaimed Time magazine's Man of the Year and was revered around the world as the man who made the trains run on time. Italy's progress, though, was at the expense of liberty. Mussolini and the fascists cared little for individual rights. In the USA's Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote that government exists for the people. Mussolini's fascists believed the opposite, that people existed for the good of the nation. More and more, Mussolini was angered by his country's lack of rewards after World War I. In order to compete with Britain and France and also to enhance his own image of himself, Mussolini wanted to recreate the old Roman Empire. In 1935, he took his first step toward that goal by invading Ethiopia, the only African country that was not already a European colony. Using tanks, planes, and even poison gas, Mussolini's troops easily conquered the underdeveloped nation. As the 1930s continued, Italy drew closer and closer to Nazi Germany. They founded the Axis powers in 1939 with a treaty Mussolini called the Pact of Steel. And there you see a newspaper map of Ethiopia in 1935 when the Italians invaded. Most people in America probably didn't even have any clue where Ethiopia was. So, when we look back at it, you can say, boy, we should have done something, and we probably should have. But, at the time, you couldn't convince the American public that what was going on in Ethiopia was more important than what was happening back home during the Great Depression in 1935. The Dark Empire of the Nazis. In Germany in the early 1920s, inflation spiraled out of control. In 1918, 3 German marks equaled $1. By 1922, it took 3 trillion marks to equal a single US dollar. The life savings of the German middle class were wiped out in one trip to buy food. The Weimar Republic simply could not keep up with the reparations demands of the Allied governments, and the German economy collapsed. And here you see a kind of a picture from that time period where a woman is buying a head of cabbage, and she's got a basket full of money just to get one head of cabbage. That's kind of what people were reduced to. They were giving away their life savings just to eat that day. Adolf Hitler's rise to power was much slower and less spectacular than Mussolini's. Hitler was an Austrian who lived in the city of Vienna until World War I started. Having nowhere else to go and considering himself more of a German than anything else, he volunteered for the German army. He served for 4 years on the Western Front and was twice decorated for bravery. A gas attack in 1918 left him temporarily blinded, and while recovering in a hospital, he learned of the armistice. Hitler was like thousands of other veterans returning to Germany. He was angry, broke, and had little to do. He went to the German state of Bavaria and settled in the city of Munich. Once there, he joined one of the thousands of political parties that sprang up in Germany since the Weimar Republic began. The German National Socialist Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, had an impressive title, but it only had 55 members when Hitler joined. The party screamed against the Versailles Treaty, Jews, and the politicians of the Weimar Republic, whom they believed stabbed the German army in the back in World War I. The stab in the back became known as the Dolchstoß legend. And you see this kind of tradition of blaming somebody else for the bad things that have happened to them, and that's kind of what the Dolchstoß legend was all about. Hitler quickly became the party's leader due to his talent for public speaking. In his speeches, he touched on the bitterness that many Germans felt after their defeat in World War I. In 1923, while still a minor political figure unknown outside Munich, Hitler and the Nazis attempted a putsch in Munich. A putsch is an attempt to grab power through violence. Hitler hoped to gain control of Munich and then the state of Bavaria. From there, the Nazis imagined the revolution would spread throughout Germany. This is how Mussolini and the Italian fascists took power in Italy in 1922. When the police in Munich refused to support the Nazis, though, the putsch fell apart, and Hitler and the other leading Nazis were convicted of treason against the Weimar Republic. Hitler was sent to prison for 9 months, where he dictated his book Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. In it, he outlined his plans for the future of Germany. He also vowed that when the Nazis did take power in Germany, they would do so legally. In Mein Kampf, Hitler explained the Nazis' beliefs. Number 1, Jews, according to Hitler, ruined the German economy and stabbed the German army in the back in World War I. Number 2, Germany needed a strong military to be re-energized. To rebuild the military, the hated Versailles Treaty had to be thrown out. Number 3, like the fascists in Italy, the Nazis believed that people's only purpose was for the good of the nation. The leader or Führer decided how best to use them. Number 4, Germany was too small and needed Lebensraum, or living space. This is an old idea in German history. Hitler was very clear in Mein Kampf where Germany would get its Lebensraum, the countries of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union. The Great Depression hit Germany hard in 1930. When people are hungry, scared, or desperate, they are often willing to give up some of their freedom in return for food and security. This occurred in Germany in the early 1930s. The German people began to support the Nazi Party because it promised to return Germany to its former greatness. In the election of 1933, Hitler became Chancellor or Prime Minister. He achieved the most powerful office in Germany and did so legally. Within a year, the Weimar Republic was gone. The Reichstag, the German parliament, gave Hitler emergency powers to deal with the enemies of Germany. This gave Hitler the power to do anything he wanted. Other political parties were outlawed, and communists, socialists, and even social democrats were jailed or shot. He murdered members of his own party whom he feared were growing too powerful. He also began taking away the rights of Jews in Germany. Hitler immediately began rearming Germany and ignoring the Versailles Treaty. He marched into the German Rhineland, which was forbidden by the treaty, and the Allies did nothing. In 1938, his homeland of Austria was annexed into Germany. This link-up, called Anschluss, was accomplished without firing a shot. Later, in 1938, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, a German-speaking part of the country. Czechoslovakia was the only functional democracy in Eastern Europe. The Czechs also had an alliance with France and the Soviet Union. They vowed to fight Hitler if he attempted to take the Sudetenland. The British and French seemed determined to stop Hitler. The Soviets made it clear they would stand by Czechoslovakia as long as France would. France, though, relied on the British to take the lead in the crisis. The British had no alliance with the Czechs and were not willing to go to war over the Sudetenland. Instead, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain met with Hitler in Munich. Hitler convinced him that he wanted no more territory after the Sudetenland. In the Munich Agreement, Germany received the Sudetenland in return for a promise for no more territorial demands. Chamberlain returned to Britain thinking he had achieved what he called peace in our time. He merely convinced Hitler that the Allies were weak. And there's a picture of Neville Chamberlain, very famous picture of him holding up this piece of paper with Hitler's name on it, kind of, hey, I got him to sign this deal. We'll just have to give him Czechoslovakia in order to get it. We're not going to war, which put the war off for about 6 months or so because Hitler couldn't have cared less. He'd sign whatever they wanted him to sign. He was not concerned about telling the truth. A few months later, Germany invaded and took the rest of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France did nothing. Countries that promised to come to its aid only days before sold out Czechoslovakia, the only democracy left in Eastern Europe. It would not become a democracy again until 1990. After Czechoslovakia, Hitler turned his attention toward Poland. This time, Britain and France said they would go to war if Germany invaded. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, France and Britain declared war, and World War II had begun. So that's kind of our look at Italy and Germany. We end off with Germany kind of taking Czechoslovakia. They did it without firing a shot, but they kind of bullied their way into getting it, and it was a country that was worth fighting for, and it didn't happen. The Czechs got sold out, and so it disappeared and became part of what was called the German Reich.